Hi, I'm Tom Hoskyns, the editor of Mining Journal, and I'm here with Mark Jarvis, who's CEO and director of Giga Metals. Now, Giga Metals is developing a low-grade nickel project in North America, and so we're going to talk to Mark about the project and about how the rise in nickel prices has done wonders for their prospects. Mark, do you want to just start us off by talking about what's on your to-do list next with this Turnagain project?
Okay, well, Tom, Turnagain is very large, low-grade, open-pittable, nickel and cobalt and sulfides deposit. We've been working on it. I've actually been working on it since 2004, but there was a bit of a slow period after 2008, 2011, and really about 3 years ago, we started getting a lot more interest in this deposit because of the rise of electric vehicles. So just for context, when I say large, our recent PEA modeled building nameplate capacity of 37,000 tons per year of nickel with a 37-year mine life. So, truly a giant deposit, and similar to scale to the giant, HPAL projects that occasionally get built in places like Papua New Guinea and Indonesia and so forth. But just for context, it's estimated that you're going to need 25 to 40 new large nickel mines to come on stream by 2040, just to supply the electric vehicle business. And I know of about maybe 20 large deposits, and by large I mean say on the order of 35,000 tons per year of nickel or thereabouts. And there's a few deposits that are sort of like ours in that they're large, low-grade, open-pittable sulfide deposits. Most of them are HPAL deposits, and what they all have in common is they're not economic at the low end of nickel prices. The incentive price to build these things is anywhere between $10 and $14 a pound for nickel. We're kind of at the low end of that range. So, I find it fascinating in that, you've got these known deposits. They need higher nickel prices to incentivize construction, but some of them are getting built despite the fact that they're not economic in Western terms, and primarily by the Chinese. So, they're building these HPAL projects with what I've calculated as an internal rate of return of between 1% and 3%. It's nothing that a Western company would do, but the Chinese are doing it. I think it's because it's for strategic reasons. They want to dominate. In fact, they do dominate the battery business, and they want to dominate the electric vehicle business. And if you want to do that, you have to have a long-term supply of the critical materials you need. And so the Chinese have done it with lithium, they've done it with cobalt, and they have done it and are doing it with nickel. And, so they accept a low rate of return on their capital, but the capital's cheap anyways, to get a long-term supply at the cost of production. And so they create the equivalent of a long-term contract at a fixed price by investing that capital. So it's very strategic, and it's extremely interesting right now because I think the Western battery manufacturers are starting to wake up to the fact that the Chinese are coming for them, and that they've got to do something similar to what the Chinese have done if they're going to be around in 10 years. Clearly,
it's one thing for Chinese state-backed players to go in and develop these projects for strategic reasons, but for a junior mining company with less deep pockets such as yourselves, how do you make it work?
Well, it's very difficult, I have to confess. I mean, if you're a small company with a huge deposit, every step of development is expensive because of just the sheer amount of drilling you have to do. This is a fairly homogeneous deposit, but it's not completely homogeneous. You have to do metallurgy over different, rock types over the deposit and so forth. So it gets to the point where like how does a company with a $30 million Canadian market cap develop a project that the total capex is going to end up, in say the $2 billion US range? It just seems unlikely, doesn't it? But the answer is, I mean, if the nickel is needed and new sources of nickel are needed, you have to find a strategic to come in and invest at the project level. And that's what we're working on. We're finding that there's quite a bit of interest from end users, from battery makers, even from car makers, which I found surprising. I mean, mining is a long way outside of an OEM's wheelhouse. However, they're starting to wake up to the fact that they need critical materials and they need to secure a supply chain. So we're getting calls from even car companies. And of course, there's all the usual trading companies and so forth. We're talking to a lot of people. And our goal is to get a joint venture partner that's a strategic that needs the nickel for some reason.
Okay, and so have you got a timeline in mind for that when you want to bring someone in?
Well, I would love it to happen tomorrow. But I think we've got quite a few discussions underway. Some of them are fairly advanced. And, I think put it this way, it's not impossible that we could, do something by year end. Don't hold me to that. You never know for sure, but I'm just sensing that there's a great deal of interest, and even the companies that are just at the beginning of the process, they're digging in, they're analyzing the deposit, they're very interested, and so things could happen fairly quickly, or not.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the project for a little bit then, because you mentioned the HPAL projects in Indonesia. There's a lot talked about the huge carbon footprint that they have, and you're talking about being a carbon neutral nickel mine. How do you go about achieving that?
Well, for starters, we've got access to the BC hydro grid, so we've got access to hydropower. And when we say carbon neutral, by the way, we're talking about scope 1 and 2 emissions to make a concentrate. And in our PEA, we looked at what carbon intensity we have, assuming a diesel mining fleet, and that was 2.24 tons of CO2 equivalent per ton of nickel produced, which is, that alone, we're way at the bottom of the scale in terms of carbon intensity. Now, if you could get an electric mining fleet, which is not available today, but I think the market's moving rapidly in that direction. If you could get that would take you to under 0.7 tons of CO2 equivalent per ton of nickel. And then when you factor in the ability of our tailings to sequester CO2 from the atmosphere, that's what gets us to carbon neutral. And we've been working with Professor Greg Dipple at the University of British Columbia. He's been studying passive sequestration of CO2 in silicate tailings for something like 16 years now, including Mount Keith in Australia, and Diavik mines in the Northwest Territories. So a nickel deposit, a diamond deposit, warm weather, cold weather. He's developed a methodology to quantify how much CO2 is getting absorbed. So if you expose a silicate rock to the atmosphere, it will absorb CO2 and convert to a carbonate mineral. And the CO2 is locked away in mineral form, in practical terms, forever. So it's not capture and storage. This is much better than that. This is sequestration. The CO2 is gone. And, and it's quite interesting, because one of the things that happens as you take the silicate sand that we would be spreading around our tailings management facility, and as you convert it to to carbonate minerals, it goes through a process of cementation. So if you can imagine a tailings management facility that's already designed to the highest levels of safety, and then you've got these sand beaches that are gradually, hardening in a cementation process, it's a pretty secure tailings management facility. So, and you contrast this to HPAL, which, I mean, the carbon footprint is much higher. I think they're averaging somewhere between 18 and 20 tons of CO2 equivalent per ton of nickel produced, but also, particularly in the Coral Triangle, like in the Pacific Ocean, these deposits aren't open pit mines, they're strip mines. They're maybe 10 meters thick, and they go for mile after mile, usually under tropical rainforests. So you're mowing down tropical rainforests to get at the dirt, processing it, very aggressively, in an HPAL circuit. And in many cases, you're simply dumping your tailings into the ocean. And even with all of that, the economics are still terrible. And in fact, like lots of these projects have failed, but even the successful ones have terrible economics in Western terms. So you're polluting like crazy. Your carbon footprint is high. I mean, people buy electric vehicles partly because they want to feel like they're saving the planet. Well, if your batteries are coming from China, you're not saving the planet. You're mowing down tropical rainforests, dumping tailings into the ocean, and you've got a very high carbon footprint. So, open your eyes.
So, well, I guess a couple of things from that. Firstly, does that mean you wouldn't partner with a Chinese company, as you progress? Have you sort of ruled that out, or are you kind of going to be Western only in your?
Well, I think for one thing, that decision's been made for me by the Canadian government over the last few years. Chinese companies have failed to get involved with Canadian resource projects because they've been turned away by the government. So, really, it just seems unlikely that our partner would be Chinese.
Yeah. And comparing your project to HPAL, clearly there's a gulf in the emissions footprint. But what about comparing you with other Canadian projects?
Well, all of the other Canadian projects that are, quote, similar, such as Demont, Canada Nickel, and so forth, they're all modeling to sell directly to stainless steel makers. They're modeling as ferronickel projects. So they're not even looking, well, I mean, maybe they're looking internally, but they have not produced any engineering that says, okay, here's the route to the cathode. And we're the only ones that I'm aware of that are focused on supplying battery metals to the cathode, because we think that's where the market is. We don't think that the world needs more ferronickel. And we're just very focused. For example, one of the things we're looking at right now, we can make a very nice concentrate, and that's what our PEA modeled. And we model selling it to a smelter. But if you take it to MHP, mixed hydroxide precipitates, so a nickel cobalt MHP product, well, we know from previous test work that we can take our concentrate and make a very nice high grade MHP product with very low impurities. And this is emerging as the chemical form of nickel and cobalt that the battery makers want. So we're currently looking at, okay, if we add a circuit, we're adding CapEx to what we're already doing. We're adding OpEx to what we're already doing. But then if you look at the payables for an MHP product compared to what a smelter will pay you, well, it more than makes up for the extra CapEx and OpEx. And it is the market of the future. I say unto you, this is MHP is what the battery makers all want. And so that's kind of our focus now, is we're doing studies internally looking at bolting on that next step.
So yeah, just wrapping things up now because we're running a little bit short for time. But just tell me where can people go to get their hands on Giga Metals shares? Where are you listed?
Well, we're listed on the TSXV with the symbol GIGA, and we're also listed on the over-the-counter QX, what they call best market. It's the highest tier of the over-the-counter market in the US, under the symbol HNCKF, I believe.
Okay, great. Well, Mark, thank you very much indeed for that whistle-stop tour of the company. It's been really interesting to talk to you.
Very good. Well, thank you very much, Tom. Appreciate it.
Not at all. Okay, that concludes this interview with Giga Metals. Goodbye.